All right, so I got some great new reporting here for you guys from the Daily Poster, giving us yet another perspective in terms of just how thoroughly corporate America has captured our judicial system and continues to influence it at the highest levels imaginable. So again, great reporting here from Andrew Perez of the Daily Poster. Go support their work. They do actual journalism that I wish the mainstream press would do a lot more of, but he says, Coke machine pressing Supreme Court to crush the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He says, dark money groups funded by the fossil fuel billionaire are lobbying justices to block the agency from limiting greenhouse gas emissions. So let's get into some of the details here. They say dark money groups bankrolled by billionaire Charles Koch, who is the one remaining Koch brother. The other one passed away. Not going to say anything, but hopefully this guy follows suit sometime in the future. But he says bankrolled by Charles Koch are lobbying the Supreme Court to limit environmental regulators' power to reduce carbon emissions, according to filings reviewed by the Daily Poster. And the new pressure campaign follows the conservative oil tycoon using his political network to help install Donald Trump's 3 ultra-conservative justices on the Supreme Court. So, I mean, already, just conceptually think about what's happening right here. We have an oil tycoon billionaire who is using his wealth and influence under our corrupted political system, as well as his wealth and power that comes from his dominance as a billionaire under a capitalist economic framework. He's using this to influence Supreme Court justices, okay? The institution that they pretend is like politically neutral in some way, okay? Even the idea of outside, ultra wealthy capitalists influencing our political system at all, whether it's through campaign contributions, super PACs, etc., even that in and of itself is a massive problem that basically defines political corruption within the United States. But to add on top of that you are not only lobbying for, general legislation, but you are also specifically lobbying actual sitting Supreme Court justices is just like absolutely insane. This is not what a democracy does. These are people who theoretically are supposed to be sitting at the top of our entire legal system and interpreting the law as it stands. They're not supposed to be influenced by outside political pressures, but that's exactly what's happening. They say, later this month, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in West Virginia via the Environmental Protection Agency, of course, coming out of West Virginia, as we, have to talk about Joe Manchin again. But the case could decide whether the EPA is allowed to issue rules to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and comes at a time when scientists are warning that governments must rapidly decarbonize the planet in order to avoid catastrophic weather-related impacts from climate change. And they say if the court sides with the Koch groups, the chief environmental regulator in one of the world's largest carbon-emitting nations would be barred from enacting many policies to combat climate change. And they say the Koch network helped arrange the court's current composition, and now at least 5 nonprofits tied to Koch have filed amicus briefs in the West Virginia case, pressing justices to determine that the agency does not have the authority under the Clean Air Act, the landmark 1970 air quality law, to set new limits on greenhouse gas emissions. So first of all, just in the most simplistic way, how the fuck could you be making a reasonable argument that the Environmental Protection Agency, the institution that Congress already gave the power to help to regulate environmental issues, how could you possibly turn around and say they don't have the legal statute or the legal authority to regulate things like greenhouse gas emissions? That's like what the entire agency is supposed to do. That's like if there was one thing that the agency has as their job and what they should be focused on right now, it's literally that. So they're basically just trying to completely obliterate the entire existence of the EPA at all, which has already been, thoroughly hollowed out and gutted over years by these same, corrupt motherfuckers. Okay, so just completely ridiculous situation that we have right here. But they say fossil fuel interests are hoping that the Supreme Court will deliver a broad rule that the EPA can't use the Clean Air Act to tackle any significant new problem without going back to Congress each time for a new and very detailed legislation, noted David Donziger, sorry, confusing him with Stephen Donziger, who we're about to get to here, Senior Strategic Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council's Climate and Clean Energy Program, saying, quote, they're counting on lobbyists and dark money to keep Congress gridlocked gridlocked so that those new laws are impossible to pass. So you see what they're doing here. First of all, the amicus briefs that these, corporate tied or corporate funded think tanks are able to file in these cases, those in and of themselves are a problem because number one, lots of times we don't even know where the funding mechanisms are coming from. This is just one specific instance that, thanks to the Daily Poster, we know that these are Koch tied, think tanks that have been filing these amicus briefs. But basically what an amicus brief is it gives outside forces the ability to introduce their opinion to how this entire legal situation should be interpreted by legal representatives, in this case, the Supreme Court. So they filed these lower level amicus briefs to give all of these different completely fucked up opinions that basically the EPA shouldn't have any authority whatsoever to do what it's supposed to do. And then these are being brought to the Supreme Court. These views are being brought to the Supreme Court, the highest level of legality within the United States. So again, they have completely interwoven their corruption within the entirety of the US political system. It's not enough for them to funnel infinite sums of money via super PACs into, corrupt Democrats and Republicans' campaign coffers. That's not enough for them. They also need to lobby directly to Supreme Court justices that they already helped to get onto the courts. Okay, so just this rampant cycle of corruption that seeps within every single aspect of the US political system. Now, again, we're dealing with a guy in Joe Biden who we've yet to see him put up any serious fight on climate change. And not only that, but specifically pertaining to the Supreme Court, okay, again, kind of ties into the absurd arguments of how, we can't expand the Supreme Court, for example, because that would delegitimize it and would make it more of a political institution. It's already a political institution. We have Supreme Court justices being lobbied by billionaire oil tycoons, okay? You've already lost that battle, so you might as well expand the Supreme Court and get people who are going to, take climate change seriously and are going to side with the idea that maybe the EPA should have the authority to regulate the environment. I don't know, crazy idea, I guess, supposedly, but again, we're dealing with a president in Joe Biden who not only has been essentially absent in the fight for climate change, right? He can go out there and give tweets all day and say, I believe in climate change, but effectively, what has he been doing on a substantive level? Well, we've been keeping up with the many different ways that he has actually been worse than Donald Trump in numerous different ways on the environment. Not saying Trump was great. They've both been pretty cataclysmically inadequate on this front, but regardless, we have Biden is approving more oil and gas drilling permits on public lands than even Donald Trump did in his first 3 years. So we'll have to see where Biden goes from here, but obviously not trending in the right direction. We also saw the absolute failures from the congressional level. So when the Koch brothers, or when the Koch brother says that he doesn't think the EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions unless Congress passes specific laws about these types of things. Well, we've seen exactly what Joe Biden and what our Congress, as it currently stands right now, is able to do on climate change. I mean, all they got through was this bullshit, watered down, hollowed out, bipartisan infrastructure bill that is actually a net negative on climate change because it funds things like, expansions of roads and bridges and things that use cars and require more fossil fuels to be produced. It has subsidies in different areas that will help out the fossil fuel industry. And meanwhile, they completely failed to pass the Build Back Better Act, which was going to be the counterbalance that actually invested in climate change. And how did they fail to pass Build Back Better? Well, they essentially let a millionaire coal baron named Joe Manchin from West Virginia, they essentially let him completely eviscerate the possibility of actually tackling climate change. So again, on multiple different levels, we've seen the failure from the Joe Biden administration, both from the executive level, from the judicial level, and how hard Merrick Garland is trying to challenge the fossil fuel industry. But on top of that, we've also seen his own political incompetence, where the single biggest issue that we should be talking about right now in climate change is not even on the table legislatively right now. I mean, there's no, actual on the table way that Joe Biden has a plan for to get climate legislation passed at all. He has no plan for anything to get past Joe Manchin. So, what the fuck are you doing? You can go out there and say you believe in climate change, but what are you actually doing on the ground? And again, this entire situation just reminded me of not only how thoroughly captured our entire political system has become from the fossil fuel industry and other wealthy, industrialist capitalists, etc., but we also saw this story that fed into that exact same idea and narrative, specifically pertaining to the judicial system, because we had had Stephen Donziger, who has thankfully now been released from prison, but still facing, ongoing attempts from Chevron and the fossil fuel industry to prosecute him. But we had Stephen Donziger, who was essentially thrown into prison, thrown into a federal prison, okay, and locked away in his house in home arrest as well, for basically the crime of finding Chevron guilty of completely destroying an area of the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador that was the size of Rhode Island. Okay, so Chevron, a fossil fuel company, goes into Ecuador, completely fucks up a massive swath of land, okay, pollutes massive portions of this, kills people with the pollution that they inevitably had to suffer from in their waterways, etc. So causes immense, unimaginable destruction to the people of Ecuador. Stephen Donziger goes down there, wins a case on behalf of the indigenous people of Ecuador against Chevron, and instead of paying the money that they owed to the people living in this area, they instead chose to try to prosecute and successfully prosecute using their own, corporate-tied lawyers and corporate-tied prosecution teams to get the guy thrown in prison. So again, the lesson at the end of the day is this is not anything that should be massively surprising to anyone. This is just what capitalists are going to do to try to completely eviscerate any sense of government regulations that exist. This is exactly what they want to do. They want to completely hollow out the EPA and essentially destroy it as an institution. So what can be done? Well, at the bare minimum, we need to have a legislation passed that is guaranteeing the ability for us to see exactly who is funding a lot of these amicus briefs, but even that doesn't go remotely, far enough. We should not have billionaire oil tycoons legally have the ability to influence our political system top to bottom in any way, shape, or form, okay? Ban the super PACs, ban the political contributions from corporations and billionaires, and certainly don't allow them to directly fucking lobby the Supreme Court.